I'm Bill O'Donnell, and welcome to another program on spirituality. I'm indeed thrilled to have as my guest Dr. Alexander Shaia of the Blue Door Retreat here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Welcome, Dr.
Thank you,
Alexander.
Bill. It's
Great
a
to have
delight.
you. I first met Alexander as at the Institute for Spirituality at the College of Santa Fe. Was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
2 years.
2 years ago. And as the program director, he won the all-time award for the best substitute teacher we've ever had. He came in at short notice and gave us a week. That was just phenomenal. I says, okay, we've got another human treasure here amongst us to share in growth and spirituality.
I'm everybody's favorite pinch hitter.
Well, that's like sixth man in basketball,
yeah.
So pretty soon you're on your way to the All-Stars as a starter. So you are a starter now here at Spirituality TV, so welcome.
Thank you.
By way of introduction, share a little bit about your life and how things got developing for you. First of all, I should mention that he is a psychotherapist, he is a spiritual director, a retreat director, an inspirational speaker, an author, and I've left out, and he helped start the RCIA program for the Roman Catholic Church, among others, a Notre Dame graduate, among others. I could go on, but I don't have my sheet in front of me. So how's that for a start?
I mean, the thing that's most important about my life is that I was born of immigrant parents in Birmingham, Alabama. And it's really only been in the last few years that I've come to understand how much of my life and how much of my faith is founded on those early years in Birmingham. Birmingham was not kind to immigrants in the 40s and 50s. And my family saw the worst part of the KKK head on, face on. The story of when I was 7 years old, the KKK burned down my grandmother's house. And in the succeeding year after that, they burned down most of my family's homes, my aunts and uncles.
I just wonder for a minute, because most people think in terms of African Americans being the object of their perverse affection, shall we say. Right. But in your case, you are of Lebanese descent and you're Catholic, and that's why they attacked your grandmother?
Exactly. Catholics in general, but especially immigrant Catholics in Alabama. And this wasn't true across the South, but in Birmingham, if you were an immigrant Catholic, you were marked.
And this is as late as the 50s? Or
this is late. My grandmother's house was burned down in 1957.
Wow. And you were 7 years old?
I was 7 years old.
Didn't know if she was alive or dead?
Didn't know, because my grandmother was a crippled, and we were called to the fire, and of course we were all horrified. None of us knew where she was that night, and fully expected that she probably was in the house. But very fortunately, a friend had dropped by and taken her to church that night.
Gee. Saved by the Lord.
Saved by the Lord.
Oh, wow. So obviously that had a big effect upon you.
It had a big effect because in my childhood I knew hate. I mean, I don't want to dwell on hate, but I knew hate. I looked at hate, and I knew that there was something about me that other people hated.
Yeah. I also remember from reading in your notes that you are the third son in a row. Is that correct? You have two older brothers?
I have two older brothers. I'm by far the youngest.
Oh, okay, because I have two older brothers as well.
All right.
And did birth order have anything effect on your interest in where you ended up or where your call was in life, besides being your ancestor?
What's interesting is I come from a family of priests.
Yeah, explain that.
Well, my family in Lebanon, my grandmother's last name is El-Khoury, which means the priest. And through her line of the family, there are 9 Maronite priests going back to the year 1200. And every son that was to be the priest in the line was given the name Alexander. So it was unusual that in our family line that my parents waited until their third son was born to give that name. So I was given that name with full intent. And it really matched my calling, not quite the same way as my parents thought it was, but it really, that's who I am, that's what I do in the world.
Yeah, yeah. A lay priest, in effect.
A lay priest.
Yeah. Well, I understand we're all called to be priestly people.
Absolutely.
And not necessarily, and ordained is just extraordinary,
right.
Touching. So please continue with your life story that led you to where you are today.
Well, growing up in Birmingham, I knew that I needed to get out of Birmingham, and education was going to be my way out of that very difficult city. So I was very fortunate to get a scholarship to the University of Notre Dame, which is where I landed as a sort of naive, wet behind the ear freshman in the late 60s, and just had my heart blown open by what was the faith, the way of understanding Catholicism that I experienced there. It was just phenomenal.
Let's set the stage here. In the late 60s, where I grew up in San Francisco Bay Area, was a hotbed of activity. Was it similar at Notre Dame in the late 60s? Was there a concern about the Vietnam War there that influenced you or influenced your contemporaries at that time?
Notre Dame was very activist, but I don't think in any way compared to the Bay Area. Okay. Coming from Birmingham, Alabama, it seemed like I had gone to the hotbed of liberalism. Wow. But looking back on it, that wasn't true.
Yeah. Explain your background as a Marian Catholic for a minute. So a lot of people here who are Roman Catholic or Orthodox Catholic don't know the distinction about that.
Within the Roman Catholic Church, there are 13 different traditions. The Latin or the Roman Rite is the largest in number, and it's the one that most everyone knows, and its patriarch is the person that we call the Pope, who is the Bishop of Rome. But each of the other 12 traditions are headed by their own official patriarch. And the tradition that my family comes from in Lebanon is called the Maronite tradition. And it is in union with Rome, but it is very different from the Roman tradition.
How so?
We have our own way of worshiping. Latin was never the language of our tradition. Aramaic was the language. Within the
which was the language Jesus spoke.
Which is the language Jesus spoke. The Maronite tradition has always maintained that priests can be married. Bishops must be celibate, but your parish priest could be married. And it has its own rules and laws. Its beliefs are the same, obviously, as the Roman tradition, but the way we worship and the way life is structured is quite different.
So if you did want to be a priest and a Maronite, you could be married and a priest?
You could be, although not in the United States.
Right.
The Maronite dioceses in the United States have decided not to hold that privilege.
I see. But if they wanted to, they could go out of the United States and be ordained and still be able to serve as a priest in this country?
There are many, many, many married Maronite priests.
Okay, great. I thought that would be of interest to our viewers. Right. Okay, so there you are at Notre Dame in the 60s, and tell us what that was like.
Well, coming from Birmingham,
yeah.
What was fascinating to me was to find the theology department at Notre Dame so wide, so inspiring. And
that was your major?
It was not my major, actually.
Oh.
It was my minor.
Oh.
My major was anthropology. I went to Notre Dame to study psychology, but at that point it was very Skinnerian. It was, I mean, I spent a year watching rats run in mazes. This was not for me.
Okay.
So I went from psychology to anthropology, but was taking a number of theology classes because I intended to enter seminary, which in fact I did after I left Notre Dame.
A diocesan seminary or religious?
I went into the Maronite Seminary in Washington, D.C.
Okay. So you felt a call to at least explore this more fully?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that was a good move for you, even though it didn't lead to ordination?
It was a good move. It did not lead to ordination. And when I had to make the decision to leave, it was very painful. To leave the seminary, it was very painful. Because it's clearly the calling that my family had for me. And yet, as I look back now, I can understand that grace was operating. But it was very, very, very difficult for my parents when I left.
Well,
there are 12 Alexanders in the line, and 9 of them were Maronite priests. And my family, because they clearly saw my gifts and my calling, that was the only category they had for fulfilling those.
Okay, so jumping ahead, given all the experience you have, though, it's clear to me, having been a beneficiary of your teaching, your influence on me, I can testify that you are a priest. You're just not ordained. You helped me in my spiritual life. You helped all those at every setting I've been with you, the most recent being at St. Francis Cathedral in their adult enrichment and numerous others, the National Brothers Conference, and you've been out enriching the church in your way.
Right, right. The gift in not being ordained is that I have the time to study, to contemplate, and sadly even to pray. And I would just say it sadly because I look at what's happening to people in the traditional roles today, and they don't have time. There are so many needs. They are called on for so many things. They don't have time to do what I have the luxury to do, which is to spend a great deal of every day in prayer and contemplation, and from that to teach.
Which, as we know, as a former teacher, for every hour you're in the classroom, there's at least 3 hours of preparation, and you wouldn't have that. Even in the monasteries today, everybody's so busy that they don't get as much time as they would like. So tell us a little about, we'll come back to we'll intersperse your training in your back, but tell us about your work and where it led to after you graduated from Notre Dame and you went to the seminary for a time. What then came next for you?
Well, when I left seminary, I began working for Catholic parishes in Catholic dioceses, and I did that officially and full-time for 20 years.
And what capacities, what type of things?
Everything from setting up chairs for afternoon classroom settings to head of education for parishes, head of religious education for 2 dioceses in the United States. So I've seen pretty much the church in and out in every role.
I also noted from your bio that you were instrumental in the beginning of the Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults, or the RCIA program, where the church in its wisdom after Vatican II said, we've got to help our adults continue in their faith and their growth, or that people who are attracted to the church. I'm just recently familiar, I should say, with it, or because I'm enrolled in it as we speak as a sponsor for someone, and I'm learning more about it. Tell us about that program and how that benefits people.
Well, the fascinating thing was I started studying rites of initiation in my undergrad in anthropology. And I became very aware that there's a rhythm around the world about how a person is initiated, how a person grows in maturity. So this document is promulgated in Rome in 1972, but it's not translated into English in the United States until 1976. But the parish that I was hired by in 1975 was designated as an experimental parish, and we had this document, and we were sitting here looking at it and scratching our heads and saying, what is this thing? And so from the very first moment, I began to work with this document program, but I discovered that it's just really the way grace works in our life. It's not so much a program as it's an understanding of how God moves in our life for everybody. And the wisdom of the Roman Church is we had this jewel sitting here on some shelf in some library or museum that we finally reached up and dusted off, and it's like, oh my gosh, here is how God moves in your life. Here's how Spirit moves in your life. Here's how you grow in understanding who you are, understanding your responsibilities to another person, and understanding your responsibility to God.
That's important stuff.
It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
And most people don't even think about it.
No, and the basis of this document is it has 4 steps in it, or 4 movements, however you want to say that, and they've got sort of complicated names on them. But the truth is, which I knew first from my spirituality, and then I discovered in all my psychological training, was this is how we grow. This is just simply how we grow. We grow because a question comes into our life. And the question usually afflicts us in some way. We wrestle with it. We're unsure of ourselves. We don't know where it's leading. We don't know what it's about. We don't even know whether it's good or evil. But it has us and it won't let go. And there's something in that question which is basically about our relationship to God. And the church calls that a period of inquiry. But phenomenal to me was having learned the rites of initiation in anthropology, having then begun working on this in the Roman Church and seeing how it's a universal truth, I then discovered the very same pattern in the four Gospels. And this is the heart of my work today, because there is a mystery in these ancient old texts that thousands upon thousands of books have been written about.
This book, we're talking about this
We're
book,
talking
right?
about the four Gospels.
Four Gospels. Okay.
But they are so contemporary. They're alive.
Yeah.
They speak to us in the United States right now. They speak to my life here in Santa Fe right now, because they were documents that were written because somebody asked a question. You know, some people think that the people who sat down and wrote the Gospels sat down because they just simply wanted to write a life of Jesus. Well, that's not how the Gospels came to be written. They weren't writing the life of Jesus. A community came and they said, we have this question right now about what's going on in our life. And the evangelist was inspired to tell a story to help answer a question. And we have the four Gospels that are exactly the same four steps that we have in the rites of initiation. They're exactly the same four steps that we have around the world in rites of initiation. But leave that language aside. These are the four great spiritual questions that everyone wrestles with. And the phenomenal truth in the Gospels is, you know, people today want to say, well, why wasn't the Gospel of Thomas put in? Why wasn't the Gospel of Philip? And now today we're hearing about the Gospel of Mary. The church knew that these four Gospels answered the questions. It's not that these four Gospels best told the life of Jesus. That wasn't why they were being written. They are manuals for spiritual growth.
The four Gospels.
The four Gospels. Shall I give you an example?
Yes, that would be great.
Let's take the Gospel of Matthew.
Okay.
Gospel of Matthew was written in the community of Antioch. It's written somewhere in the 70s of the first century. It's written right after the temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed. Now, the community in Antioch is primarily a Jewish community that's come to believe that the Messiah has come. So, in Antioch, we're going to hear questions that are as contemporary as our newspaper today. There are four voices in the Jewish community in Antioch. One community is saying, the temple's destroyed, it's the apocalypse, the end time is here. This is the sign of the last age. Get ready. The world is about to be destroyed by fire or water. The second part of the community in Antioch is the Pharisee community. And they're saying, no, the temple was destroyed because you didn't observe God's law well enough. God is punishing us. And because of that, we need to return to clear, diligent observance of the law. God will bless us again, and then we can go back and rebuild the temple. The third part of the community in Antioch is saying, I got to put food on the table. I don't have time for all these big issues. You figure it out. Let me just find a way to feed my kids. The fourth voice in Antioch is the voice that we would now today call the Christian voice. It was the Messianic Jews. And they said, look, the loss of the temple is an enormous loss, but the temple can go away. It's not a sign of the apocalypse. It's not a sign of God's displeasure with us. In fact, what it is that there is a new temple. There's a new law, and it's inside each and every person. And it's the law of love, and it's the law that Jesus the Christ came to show us the way to live. And because we live in the presence of that temple, the old temple can go away. We don't have to, it's amazing. The apocalyptic community in Antioch was saying, we have to go back to Jerusalem and we have to rebuild the temple bigger and better and stronger and higher, and we have to show people they can't push us around anymore. And the Christian message was, we don't have to meet that terror with terror. Mm-hmm. because we have the presence of a life inside that lets us live in fearful times without fear. Every chapter, every passage in the Gospel of Matthew goes to the same place, step by step by step. It teaches us how to live in a fearful moment without fear.
And there's a lot of that today.
And there's a lot of that today. And the primary text is, I don't care what people are telling you. Maybe an apocalypse is coming. Maybe an apocalypse is not coming. Should you be concerned about it? No.
Yeah, what difference is? You still got to work on yourself. And
Right.
yeah, your spiritual life still goes on.
You can live this moment with love and care. You can live this moment with God. You can live this moment with ease. You can be in a world of fear, but you do not have to be a person of fear.
And that's the message of the gospel.
And that's the message of the gospel. It's primarily the message of Matthew.
Yeah.
Not just as a message, but Matthew gives a manual about how to do this in your life if you have the key to open the door to understand chapter by chapter how he's leading the community in Antioch and leading us to live in a fearful world without fear.
Important stuff. Listen, if you've just recently joined us, we're having a conversation with Dr. Alexander Shaia of the Blue Door Retreat here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, who's a noted speaker and author and teacher. And I wanted to give you a flavor of some of the work that Alexander's doing, and I know he's right now just completing a book on the four Gospels, which we try to hold this show off, but I couldn't hold off any longer, so you'll have to come back and tell us when that book finally comes out. But we want to be sure and let you know to go and see. And what is your website again?
BlueDoorRetreat.com.
BlueDoorRetreat.com. So be sure and write that down.
All three words, even the double R's. BlueDoorRetreat.com.
Okay, fully spelled out, so you can go and find out far more information about him and his writings. But in the short time that we have left, I want people to also know how you're available as a resource here, and you will travel in the other work that you're doing besides your work as an author.
Right.
Can you tell us about that?
I travel locally and nationally. I do parish missions, seminars, retreats, inspirational speaking. Here in Santa Fe at the Blue Door, we do prayer every morning of the week except Sunday, 7:30. It's called Lectio, which is quiet sitting with a scripture passage. The same thing on Wednesday nights. On Wednesday nights, we use the gospel for the coming Sunday to quietly sit with. Our ministry is primarily a ministry of prayer and contemplation, and we welcome people to email or to call in with prayers that they would like us to pray for. I also do spiritual direction. I have a small practice in psychotherapy, and people come from near and far to make retreats at the Blue Door, either to do it quietly with me as a spiritual director or just self-directed.
You also were one of the pioneers, or in that second generation, of sand play therapy. Are you still doing that professionally?
I am still doing that professionally. It's not what's nearest and closest to my heart at this moment. Really, the work on the Gospels and my own personal prayer life is totally central.
Okay. And how and what type of people would benefit from the kind of work that you're doing? I mean, I've seen you talk to the National Brothers Conference, to different institutions here. There's something about it, I just have to tell it from my own experience, when you hear a layman with passion and knowledge and study talking about the Gospels, that's one thing that you've done for me, Alexander. You have opened them up and given me perspectives that I didn't have yet, or gave me a slant or a spin that I think are so valuable today. Right. That's why I can't wait for your book to come out, because I feel it's really going to be helpful with that. Can you give us just a little flavor of that, what we can expect?
Well, each one of these Gospels is a story. And what I try to help people to do is not to look at a passage in Matthew and look at a passage. Stay in Matthew, stay in Mark, understand the story that this gospel author is telling you, because each author is trying to lead us to be people of prayer. These texts were composed to teach us how to pray. They were not composed so much to teach us about dogma. They were composed, again, it's a text that talks about how to pray in a fearful moment. I love to go out. I have worked all over this country. I've worked in the bayous of Louisiana. I've worked in poor inner city parishes. I've worked in suburban parishes that are fairly wealthy. I've worked East Coast, West Coast, Southeast, Northeast. I love taking this message out to people. The Gospels are phenomenal stories of faith that are as contemporary as this morning's newspaper.
I know, and they now have new versions that you can read easily. It's not the old King James anymore or something like that. Even the King James is a new version, but there's many things that that you can read. What if
I wish at this moment I could give people the title of the book. The publisher is going to put it on, but you can always keep checking the website, and all the information about the book and publication date will be on the website.
Okay, that's great. So if you're looking for an inspirational speaker or someone to unpack this book for you or your parish or your church, because he works within and outside the church of Catholicism, so he's there for anyone who wants him, I'd encourage you to contact him. Go to the website, go to www.bluedoorretreat.com, all spelled out, and see it for yourself. And hopefully something that you've said or that Alexander said today will inspire you in your spiritual life. It's one path, it's a great path, and one that can benefit you no matter what your background is. So I want to thank you for coming in today and sharing some of this with us. And promise me you'll come back to let me know as soon as your book is published.
Bill, I promise you I'll come back. And thank you so much for having me.
It was so much fun. I want to thank our friend Diego Mulligan for bringing us together on his show, The Journey Home, to have us to go over and see the Passion of the Christ and come back and share that with people. That was really something.
It was quite a moment.
Yeah. Okay, on behalf of everyone here at Spirituality TV, I'm Bill O'Donnell. I want to thank our director Doreen and our camera people Alan and Connie and all those helping behind the scenes. I want to thank you for viewing. So please watch the credits, contact Alexander, continue in your own spiritual life, whatever way the Lord is calling you, and to stay tuned next week at this time for another program on spirituality.